Hello, hope you're doing marvelously well. We have had an amazing week. On Sunday of this week, we hit 200,000 whopping subscribers. That is absolutely freaking miraculous. And it's all because of you. In the last 3.5 years, this channel has grown to 200,000 subscribers, courtesy of the wonderful people of the world that have joined us. Now, all joking aside, I really appreciate this. This has been absolutely incredible. The thing about it is not just that we have a lot of subscribers, it's that there's all of this interaction going underneath here. People are talking to each other, they're swapping ideas, the questions are wonderful. It's a really wonderfully positive community. So thank you ever so much for being part of that. As ever, please subscribe. Hey, that's how we get 200,000 subscribers, by subscribing. Also, apparently, not only do you have to now hit the notification bell, you then have to go and select that you actually want to see the videos you subscribe to. Mind blown. So here it is. It's Friday. So what happens on Fridays? It's Fact Friday. That's frequently asked questions. Fact Friday. But two things are happening. Fact Friday and this. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, I haven't yet demoed this on camera, but this is an amazing microphone. This is Lauten Audio's tube microphone, or, well, vacuum tube or valve for those of us from the United Kingdom. We would say valve. This is absolutely gorgeous. So we're going to give this away as well as the Fact Friday because it is our 200,000 giveaway week. So let's open this up. Now, you might ask about this. Well, first of all, I love tube microphones. So this is phenomenal thing to give away. So thank you ever so much, Lauten, for doing this for us. The other wonderful thing about this is I was talking to Daryl Thorpe. Do you know Daryl Thorpe? If you don't, I'm sure you will check him out. He is one of the great engineers, one of the greatest engineers in the world, and he's made so many incredible microphones, and he loves this microphone. So, and he uses it all the time. So I thought to myself, well, that's a pretty darn good recommendation. So here it is. It's the LA320 vacuum tube microphone. Voila. It has a 20 to, looks like 15 rolls off. Anyway, look, there's a frequency response. Probably not in focus, but anyway. It's rather lovely. Rather lovely. Oh yes, look at that. And being a tube microphone, it has, if I can ever get it out. That's what she said. What? Said the Bishop Theatress? Okay, it has a power supply, of course, because it has to drive the tube, or the valve, as we like to say. Notice how I said an American tube, as opposed to tube? But anyway, yes. So this is a valve microphone. It's absolutely gorgeous. We will be using it, and you will be watching a review of it, but not in this week's Fact Friday. I'm getting it into Friday's video because, as you know, this is the 200,000 subscriber week, and every day we've been doing giveaways. So I sort of snuck it a little quicker. I've got the giveaway in a little bit before we do the full review, but the review that's coming out is absolutely stupendous. We're going to go to an amazing studio and record an amazing artist. So watch out for that. Okay, there's a beautiful little clip here, which is a suspension clip, as you can see, which means you can put it in a stand and it will take, you know, all kinds of abuse. You can kick the stand and you won't get any thumps. That's rather lovely because, of course, large diaphragm condensers are a little bit more sensitive. You know, they're a bit more sensitive. You have to treat them nicely. All in a rather lovely, handy case. And this can be yours just by entering the lovely competition, which is somewhere around here. And not only do you get that, you also get me now waffling on Fact Friday. So let us get started. What I've learned from this, that it's better to have a really good mixing engineer than to learn this all by myself and instead focusing on making great songs. Why compete with the best mixing engineers? You know what? This is a really, really, really good question. Graham over at Recording Revolution, who's a good friend of ours, and as you know, has started off more engineers, producers, and mixers in this business probably than anybody else. He is fantastic at cultivating and mentoring young up and coming people. My hat is off to him. Graham does an amazing job. He did a video recently talking about should you be a jack of all trades? So that's a very, very interesting discussion point, and it seems to fall a little bit into what this particular person is saying here. So my answer to your question is yes and no. Yes, of course, if you have more budget than you could ever imagine, and you can just cherry pick the finest people in the world, you'll always get incredible results. Of course. Well, not even always. More often than not. Not always. Sometimes getting the best people for the job doesn't always give you the best results. That is just a fact. And it's just life. However, you're going to exponentially increase the likelihood if you hire an external mixer that also maybe works in your genre, has tons of credits in it, has, most importantly, really, really good sounding mixes. However, it's not a guarantee, but yes, it is increasing the likelihood. So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is this. I recently did a webinar with Bobby Alsinski, and we did a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and a similar question to this came up. So this is something that must be permeating a lot at the moment. My answer is this. When I first started in this industry, I would go to a recording studio with a nice console like this and a tape machine like I have over there. And there was a guy or a girl whose job it was to align the machine, bias the tape machine, have it come up on the console, zero out the console, make sure the kick came out of channel 1, you know, the snare out of 2, etc. Sit there and like lay everything out. Then the compression, additional compression that the mixer might want was patched in, or different EQs, you name it, delays, reverbs, you know, all these auxiliaries here. There was a setup time in a mix alone, let alone recording, but in a mix that was a few hours when you turned up with a reel of tape. Now, ever since the mid-90s on, that has decreased to a point now where hardly anybody records on 2-inch tape. Now, of course, there are records still being made on tape, don't get me wrong, but most records, and the records that we're talking about here, records you make yourself, are more likely to be done in a DAW. So why am I bringing up these really obvious points? Well, this is why. Because half of the job that I used to have to do as an engineer was technical setup and preparation. And now with the DAW, I open it up, I'll import the tracks, or more often than not, somebody sends me their tracks inside of their session, and everything is massively done. I am no longer like aligning a tape machine, biasing it. I'm no longer just zeroing out a console and setting it up. If I want to patch in a compressor here, you know, it's a couple of minutes. Not a long time, but it's a couple of minutes. That's not a long time. If I want to patch in a compressor in my DAW, it's a couple of nanoseconds. It's visible. 2 seconds would be a long time. Select 1, 2. A lot of our job now is so streamlined. And where we used to have 2 or 3 people doing one job, one person's now doing that. So to answer that jack of all trades, or should you hire an external person? Of course, if you have an unlimited budget, go to the finest studio in the world, have the best assistant engineers, maybe 2 of them, have an engineer, have a mixer, have a producer, have the world's greatest guitar player, bass player, drummer, have a programmer who can program your beats, have a Pro Tools editor sitting in the other room. This was commonplace in the late 90s and early 2000s. This was the situation. Sometimes you had 2 or 3 Pro Tools editors on an album. Can you believe that? And somebody who just programmed. It was insane. Now those records, like Eric Valentine, look at the records he makes. Incredibly talented guy. It's like him and maybe an assistant. And he's doing everything. He's producing, he's engineering, he's mixing, and his records sound amazing. They sound amazing because, yes, he's incredibly talented and he knows his gear inside out, but also because things are easier to get to now. So I'm still going on about this, and maybe I'm not quite making my point as clear as it needs to be. My point is if you have the talent, you have the ears, the gear, the equipment is so much easier to understand. It's all within your DAW. You're not reaching across, trying to patch something in, running it around, blah, blah, blah. Everything is now so much more immediate and easy. And you have access to thousands of different compressors, not just the 3 that happen to be in the studio. You have access to tons, even in stock compressors, stock EQs, stock reverbs, stock delays. So a lot of this learning curve has gone away. A lot of that necessity for acquired knowledge has gone away. Not that acquired knowledge is not important. It's very important. But the most important thing is your ears. DAWs, modern recording techniques, are phenomenal because they allow you to get from 0 to creative like that. And that is an incredible thing. So do I believe that you're a jack of all trades? No, because I'm a little dismissive of that idea. Because my typical recording session in the 90s had about 5 people doing the job of maybe 1 or 2. Because now, in a home setup, a good home setup, you might have a vocal mic connected at all times. You don't have to unpatch or repatch. And your mixer and your recording device is all on one screen right in front of you. You're not repatching for a mix, for a recording, for this, for that. The immediacy of it is there. It's 0 to creative. And it's super quick. So yes, if you've got the budget, hire yourself an amazing mixer. If you don't have the budget, take the time, enjoy the process, learn, get into this community here, ask questions of other people. There's so many people that are willing to help. We have a wonderful, amazing community here. So great question. I don't like to look at it as jack of all trades, but I do like to look at it as now the entry level, the barrier to entry, as it were, has dropped to a place where now it's all about your creativity. It's all about using your ears and just enjoying the process. Cutting stuff from the kick, how narrow or wide usually? When I am taking out low mids, ugly, out of a kick drum, out of all drums, you know, which is typically centered around about 350, I can go pretty wide. You'll notice when I say 350 hertz to people, you'll often see people rightly go, oh, I do 250. Or somebody else goes, I do 400 or I do 450. Well, I do 350 because it's right in the middle of those areas and I give it a nice wide cue like that. So when I'm cutting low mids on a kick drum, it's pretty wide. I'm not just taking 350 out, that wouldn't do anything. But I'm going somewhere for about 200-ish to about 400-ish, 450, and just scooping it out. So I do really, really wide cuts for removing low mids in kick drums. Now, for creating a little space, for a little extra breathing on the bass guitar, as you know, I'm really into pulling out a little bit of 80, a little bit of 100, 110 around that area. First of all, I'll do very small increments of it. 80 is a frequency I love to shine on the bass guitar, so I'll pull out a little bit. And that can be fairly narrow cue. The 110 maybe could be just a little tiny bit wider, but still fairly narrow cue. And I actually don't just pull that out for the bass. I pull that out because when you get multiple, say maybe 3 inputs on a kick drum, kick in, kick out, maybe a kick mic on the head or one pulled back. If you've got multiple instances, there is often a build up at around about 100 hertz. You get this kind of, oh, I can't do 100, and whatever. And they get a real build up in that area. So I'll pull that out of the kick drum. So it's about that. Low mids, wide, low end, narrow. Just, you know, I don't want to pull out 80 super wide because then I'm wiping out 60 hertz, which is part of the fundamental area in the kick drum that I want to hear. And I don't want to pull out a lot of 100 super wide. Again, that'll go to 80 and too wide. I just want to pull out where it's interfering with itself, where there's multiple mics, and I should say, where the bass is living. Does the tone of the bass in the kick have any relation to where you EQ to high pass or low pass or cut? Or is it just basically in the same area no matter what? I've been to so many mixers studios and I've seen their Pultecs on their mix bus, like Crystal Algae has the Pultecs. I'm blanking on the model. Sorry, Steve Jackson. But it's the one with 70, not 60. I have 60 and I always have a boost on my master bus when I'm working hybrid on my console. At all times, I'm boosting a little 60. I am. It, to me, is very musical. Now, Chris's are 70 hertz, so a little higher. I think of kick drums as living fundamentally between about 40 and about 110. That's where I hear most of the thump When I go 70s and a little more thumpy and a little less, but a bit more like Simon Phillips's kick drum seems to live around about 80 to more like 100. Heavy rock kick drums, definitely 40 to 60, definitely. 808s, 40 to 60 and lower. So the point is it's about what is the track. Is the track kind of a fast, kind of like funky track, and the kick wants to be more like tighter and shorter? You're probably going to find 80 to 100 gets boosted. Is it a big rock kick? It's probably 60 with a nice wide bell, so it picks up quite a lot of 40 as well. Is it going to be like a dance kick and it's boom, boom? Then it's like 40 and below. So no, it's not always in the same place, but the reality is if you're taking a kick drum, a rock kick drum, you know, that fundamental, whether it's 58 or 62 is basically 60 because you're boosting and you've got a fairly wide cue. It's if you're doing incredibly finite frequencies, which you should not be doing on a kick drum there, you know, and you're pulling up like just one band, like, yeah, 62 might be where it's tuned or 58. But the reality is that you're going to get in there with some width and just kind of boost it. But 3 different areas. There's lots more, but just as illustration, dance kick could be super, super low, like an 808 kick, 40, 60 and below. Rock kick, definitely 40, 60. But not much in the way of 20. In fact, a lot of mixers take 20 out of it. They say it tightens up the mix full stop in rock. There's like nothing on 20 at all. So bear that in mind as well. And then with like Simon Phillips's kick, you'll notice his was a little tuned just a little bit higher, and he's probably more in the 80 to about 110, 120 kind of area. So there's lots of different variations, but you'll find that a lot of the time, not all of the time, but a lot of the time in rock and roll, it's around about-ish 60 hertz. But that's not all the time. It's just kind of a rough starting point, if you like. Now, as far as high passing and low passing, say 20 to 30 hertz can get high passed out, and it actually will make the kick feel bigger because that low frequency rumble, which is not audible necessarily on medium-sized monitors, is still in the track, and it is taking up a lot of energy on your master bus and causing your mix to not sound as loud and as full as you want it to. Bear that in mind. I know there's a lot of mumbo jumbo about high passing and not to do it. I saw another video this week talking about how high pass, you know, I'm over it. Every major mixer I know, not YouTube teacher, but major mixer I know is like talking about that stuff, about the mis or the disinformation. The reality is high passing is your friend. You've just got to do it smartly. Nobody has ever, I've ever met, high passed a drum kit at 300 hertz. But I think these reactionary videos are sort of making it seem like that's happening. I've never seen it happen in my life. It just means if you're doing like a funky electric guitar, you do not need 80 hertz in it. A low rumble at 80 hertz on a if it's going is going to destroy your mix. So there's no problem with you going up to 100, 120 and just wiping it off. It doesn't have to be a massively steep slope, but a nice gentle slope. These are common sense situations. Big fat synthesizers are great for filling out your track, but if you leave them with a 20 hertz to a 20 kilohertz width, there's going to be nothing else in your mix. So you need to high pass to let the bass breathe. Or you need to sit there and use dynamic EQs and duck 60 and 80. You know, there's lots of different things you have to do, but high passing is your friend. Just do it smartly. And remember, all of the biggest mixers in the world high pass very strategically and very smart. If you go and watch somebody's settings on their SSLs, it's engaged pretty much on every single channel. But they're not going up to 200, 300, 400 unless it's something, you know, maybe it's a hi-hat. They don't need anything below 400. They just want fine, totally get it. But most instances, it's just about creating clarity in the low end, because if you create the clarity in the low end, it will breathe. And I think another part of the problems is there's a lot of these guys doing some of these videos saying don't high pass, are listening on small monitors and they're not understanding the effect it's creating. And you try to master that stuff. And again, mastering engineers are telling me consistently that they're getting no definition in the low end because of these bad pieces of information. So remember that. Get in there, clean it up, let your kick drums shine, let your low end of your bass guitar shine, let the low end of your electric guitar shine, let the low end of your synths and your piano shine. get some room down there, because everybody fighting in that same area is not going to give your mix more balls. What it's actually going to give it is cloudy, muddy mess. You'll get masking, frequency masking, if there's like 4 instruments all playing 40 to 60. You want clarity down in that area so that the ones that are there shine and sound fat and huge. That's good mixing. As far as low passing, I was reading about this Otto, you know, that company that does reverbs and delays, those little boxes. The one's called the BIM and one's called the BAM. I went to go and see Johnny Marr play 2 nights ago by the time this airs. And his mixer is a guy called Russell Miller, who's a really talented mixer. And he was mixing fully analog on a Matrix console. Fully analog. And he brought the little Otto BIMs and BAMs. And those things, I believe, somebody can correct me, are 12-bit. And they have no information above 10K. I think one of them might extend to 15. So part of those reverbs that sound so phenomenal on those late 70s to early 80s records that this BIM and BAM emulates don't have any super, super high end. And yet, those are some of the best reverbs I've ever heard. So bear that in mind. You can get creative. And with reverbs in particular, you'll notice I do the Abbey Road trick. I'll take the low end off the reverb and the high end off the reverb and just let it fill out a nice room sound without super high fizziness that's interfering with my lead vocal, and without the low end going rumbling along and destroying my kick and my bass. So yes, high passing and low passing, especially the low passing, is really, really good on reverbs and delays. What's the difference between using the phase tool and actually moving the sample forward in time? I think that might be referring to how I'll use time adjuster on the drums. Now, there are many, many different tools. There is, of course, like you're saying, you could pick up the drum mic and move it back. I personally, superstitiously, always like to leave my microphones where they were recorded, the tracks exactly where they were. I need a point of reference because when I was tracking it, I spend the time to get the phase and the polarity as right as possible. So I'll measure my overheads to my snare. So they should be in phase with the snare. I like that. That's what I think sounds great. Same thing with my room mics. No matter if they're 40 feet away, they're measured to the snare. So the snare sits nice and central in my room mics. I've always done that. It seemed logical to me, and the longer I was doing it, the more I found other engineers and producers that I admired that did the same thing. So logic prevails. Now, if I'm going to take my snare and nudge it back a nanosecond, like a handful of samples to be in time with my overheads, it's going to give me more body on my overheads. People ask me, why don't I just nudge them back rather than putting a time adjuster on it? I put the time adjuster on it because I like to hear where it originally was. Because when I'm figuring out my drum sound live in the room, I'm not using mixing tools. I'm tracking it. So I want to be able to mute my mixing tools, the plugins I've added, and go, oh, I like the drum sound the way it was in the room. I'm crazy. Stop spending so long mixing it. That's just me. I don't move things around. I like to have the ability, because when I'm in Sunset Sound or one of those great studios that I love, United, when I'm in there, I'm spending a couple of hours getting the drums to sound great. When I come to mix, doing things that sometimes seem a little arbitrary isn't always the smartest thing, because I had a balance and I had a feeling in that room that was great when I was recording. So for me, I always like to have things where I recorded them, you know, not moving the tracks around, so I can go back and check. Okay, the next thing, and I think is really, really important, is there's a lot of these tools that line up transients. Now, I think that is great. I think that is wonderful, and I know people that do it. However, as Andy Wallace said a few years ago about things getting super tight and super, like every transient being on the beat. You remember he was talking about that in like Mix magazine in the early 2000s when very heavily edited drums started coming in. He said that tracks started to get a little smaller. What he was saying was like you get kicks and snares, kick and snares, everything's perfect on a grid. Every guitar hit, crang, was like to the grid. Every bass note, dot, 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 was on the grid, on the grid, on the grid. Everything was like absolutely perfect, so tight and so perfect that the one started to get small. Instead of like rang, it was like kang, because everything was like straight on there. There wasn't that sort of like softening of the below where like the transient was just a little wider. I've tried those tools, and for some unknown reason, as soon as I move everything perfectly in time, the drums going from to kind of, they just get smaller because the beats are now narrower and perfect. It's just me. They tend to get a little smaller. Now, I'm EQing the low end out of overheads. Not all of it, but quite a lot of it out. I might do that with room mics, or I might do the opposite. I might take some of the high mids out for the splashes. My point is like I'm shaping the sound. The low end might still be there for multiple mics because the ones that I'm favoring, the kick drums, all being in phase of each other using time adjuster, they're all in phase of each other and they hit, they're massive. If I'm not getting 60 hertz in my room mics or my overheads, they don't need to be moved anymore because the kick drum isn't in the overheads, the low end. So the phase, the polarity is good. The low end sounds massive on the kick. General question, how much should we remove the dynamics of a performance? It seems like the trend is to get things fairly flat. I remember compressing less than others do as long as it's not extreme. Is that bad? No. I think that is completely genre specific. I mean, it's a wonderful question. It's genre specific. If you're recording a more roots orientated, organic sounding, live instruments, you're going to compress maybe a little bit going in, and on your mix, maybe just a little bit then. Think about all of those Mike Piacente records, all of the T-Bone Burnett things. Those are definitely compressed, but they're not slammed. They're not slammed at all. They're letting the instruments breathe. Remember Richard Furch talking about this? Richard Furch said that Prince did not let him do any automation. He didn't let him turn things up. He didn't let him do builds and ramps and stuff. And when Richard said, "Why won't you let me do that?" Prince said, "Because I played it the way I want to hear it." So sometimes, genre specifically, but when you're working with great players, you are capturing their performance and you're capturing the interplay between the instrumentalists. So if the guitar player is like jan 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 jan, bass players boom 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 boom, drummers dum 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 dum, you don't want to flatten out those dynamics because that's a performance thing. So I think you're on the right track depending on your genre. Now there's lots of genres like pop, very modern pop, and EDM, where it's like it starts as a full frontal assault and finishes a full frontal assault. And everything is as loud as each other and it's competing for the same space, and there's really, really detailed EQing. Now, but that is the genre. So it's all about what is the genre. And a lot of metal, it's really, really aggressive. So you've got kicks with 7K, you've got everything super bright, and they're sitting there and they're selecting frequencies, almost paint by numbers, pull out one thing, boost another, so it all slots together like this, so that you can get this big blob of loudness. But that is part of the excitement. There's nothing wrong with that. It's part of the excitement of the track. So I think this is the stuff that I get asked all the time. And I think that, again, it comes down to experience. My experience is I've mixed bands and worked with bands of every genre, whether it be Frey or James Blunt or Black Veil Brides or Aerosmith or Korn or Ace Frehley. You know, you're talking about acoustic guitar artists, piano artists, heavy rock artists, metal artists, rock and roll artists, Mark Broussard, roots artists, Josh Radin, very soft, whispery vocals. You know, all of these different artists all have completely different genres. I've done pop art. I've worked with Conrad Sewell, you know, Conrad Sewell from Kygo. Gavin James. I mean, these are all completely different genres, and they are all treated in different ways. And I think one of the problems is that when you're getting advice maybe from somebody who works in one genre, or is like has a channel but is still learning how to do what they're doing, they're still learning their tricks. So they're telling you something as this is what they've learned, but the reality is that you need to know all of those options. Like we talked about with the kick drum, it's like, and it's very general what I was saying, but when we were talking about EQing kick drums, it was like, well, what's the genre? What's the song? How's the kick drum tuned? It's acquired knowledge and understanding all of those different things and applying them where it's right. Some forms of music need to be heavily EQ'd and compressed to be able to compete to get onto modern radio. Other forms of music, like roots and really acoustic and organic sounding music, need to be opposite, need to be all about capturing incredible open performances. So it depends on the genre you're doing. Do you gate your toms? I don't often gate my toms. The reason why is I don't need to anymore. We have clip gain, we have volume automation, we have mute automation. We have ways of picking out the toms and featuring them without using a gate, which can be a little crude. Why am I saying it's a little crude? Well, sometimes the drummer can be like cha-cha-dum, dum, ba-dum, but on a fast roll, they might go and they're hitting that floor tom super softly, and the ride cymbals may be bleeding into it. So if I have a gate, I'm either not going to capture the tom, or it's going to open and there's going to be tons of ride bleed into it. So there's no one size fits all. Nowadays, I rarely gate. I sit there and I draw in volume automation or clip gain or gaining I actually will gain the audio files themselves, boost things and cut things around it. There's a million different ways of doing it, depending on DAW, what works best for you. They all work. Volume, clip gain, gaining, muting between toms, some people do. I don't mute, I just turn down, so you still hear a little bit of the bleed. I think it makes the drum kit feel more real, rather than do, do. I like a do, do. So there's still a little bit of bleed there. I don't take it out entirely. However, you can take it out entirely, and I've heard a lot of like heavy rock records where the toms literally come from nowhere and like, and it's exciting and it sounds cool. Again, genre dependent. What is the effect you want? That's the great thing about DAWs. We can now be 50 different types of producers, 50 different types of engineer, 50 different types of mixer. We can hear something and we can mimic it inside of our DAWs. It's a great time to be doing music. So, once again, you can win this. A box. No, you can win the Lauten LA320 vacuum tube microphone. So, box is upside down. This is a beautiful microphone. It is a tube, otherwise known as valve microphone. And we are going to be doing a full review of it. You're going to watch that very soon. But in the meantime, because Lauten are a great company, they've given us this microphone to give away in celebration of having 200,000 whopping subscribers. Thank you ever so much, Lauten. You rock. Thank you everybody for subscribing. As ever, please subscribe. Go to Produce Like a Pro, sign up for the email list, and you can get a whole bunch of free goodies, and you can check out the Academy as well. I really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful week. Thank you ever so much. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.